Hey, everybody. Welcome back, yes, to another all-new edition of the Talking About Cars podcast, where it's all about everybody has a car story, a chance to forget about some of the craziness that's going on out there. And believe me, as you know, it's crazy out there right now. And concentrate on the good stuff, the craziness right here on this show. Indulging some great car stories from celebrities and car personalities. And joining us today, me, Randy Kerdoon, that's Hot Rod Bob Beck. And yes, the one and only, the guy who knows more about cars than we don't even pretend to know, Steve Magnante. You know him from Barrett Jackson. He's got his show on the Motor Trend TV network, the app actually. And, it's called Roadkill, and it's Junkyard Gold. I'm going to talk about that as well. Hey, Steve, how are you, man? Good to see you.
Doing great. Yeah, you got to love technology. Here we are. We're all quarantined or at least staying home, but it feels like we're in the same studio. It works. Great. 3,200 miles apart on Massachusetts to your California, but it feels like we're next door.
You're on a show called Junkyard Gold on the app, the Motor Trend app. The first thing I thought of when I saw that, and I saw you were doing that, and knowing your propensity for information that we see on Barrett Jackson and the books you've done, whose pitch was that? Was that your pitch to them about a show to do, or did somebody think like you and just say, this is a great show for Steve?
Well, I'll tell you, it was my idea, and I got to say, I pitched that show for 5 years to Velocity Channel, and they didn't get it. They didn't understand it. I think what it was, I didn't have any face tattoos. There was nobody yelling. There was no fire, none of that. It was a car show for car people, and somehow Velocity Channel, they didn't understand that. So I'll leave it at that. Velocity Channel's history, and now Motor Trend, David Freiberger in particular. Of course, the guy who created Roadkill, he and Freiberger and Finnegan. Freiberger, I pitched him the story, and I sent him a pilot that I shot on my dime about 5 years ago. And he says, why aren't we doing this? And they did it as an experiment, and it was a tremendous success. People liked it, and I can thank Dave Freiberger, really, and of course Motor Trend for giving it a home. And the funny thing is, a lot of the folks who were at Velocity are now at Motor Trend, and some of the folks aren't. They went off on their different directions. But it is true that in some cases, executives who decide things about automotive programming aren't car people, and that was a problem. So they thought it was too teachy, the original pilot. It's the same thing we do now, but again, they weren't really car people. They were deciding the fate of the show. But anyway, the gods won out, and the show is somewhat of a success. People seem to like it. So we're in season 4 as soon as we start shooting again. We just wrapped season 3 when this thing all kind of hit the fan. But it's a nice thing to have a success and have people understand it.
Where have you gotten all your automotive knowledge? Because you are a world of knowledge. You know which screw goes in what hole on which grill for which car, and I love listening to you when you're talking.
Well, I guess I'll say, I'm 55, and when it's probably about 8 years old, 9 years old, I started getting Matchbox cars. I started building model cars after that. And by the age 12, 15, I started to discover car magazines, Motor Trend, Hot Rod, Superstock, Car and Driver, Carcraft, all those great books. And reading those magazines really kind of tuned me into the history of cars. And of course, the authorities who wrote about them, Roger Huntington, Marty Shore, people like that. And just reading their stuff made me a professional spectator in the world of cars. And that led to me just sort of containing and learning all I can about cars. And I will say that on Barrett Jackson, when you see me, again, I guess it's been 15 years, 52 shows on Barrett Jackson, but in my left hand, I always have a little notepad. And that notepad contains things I'm going to say about the car. So I do prepare. And, if somebody tried to stump me up on paint codes or something like that, it would be very easy to do. But I know, enough about the cars to say things, and we never want to guess about cars. So I prepare when I need to, and when I'm ready to speak about cars without notes, I can do that too. But preparation goes a long way because we owe the cars more than a guess. And that's kind of the trick of it, just preparing, before you go on camera and before you go on the stage to make sure that you have something that's pertinent and not a guess.
And that's got to work also on the Junkyard show, because I'm assuming now, you don't just walk up to a 58 Edsel and go, hey, let's just take a look at the code, which somehow all the codes, all the VIN numbers and what it all means. And I mean, is there a situation where you actually show up the day before, look at some of the cars you like, then look them up, and that way you can spontaneously tell us what it's all about the next day, or how does that all work?
Yeah, well, here right now,
We're going to ruin Hollywood for everybody now.
Yeah, this is a notebook right here, okay? This is Junkyard Gold. This is book 2 for season 3. In here are notes that I create, right? Things I'm going to say. Now, here's the thing. Yes, I fly in early, about 3 days early. We scout the junkyard digitally or online to make sure that it's not all new cars, because the show is about vintage cars. So we find yards that have a good collection of old stuff. Then I fly in 3 days, even 4 days before the crew comes in. I scout the yard, and then I find the vehicles I'm going to showcase. And then, yes, I get very busy creating, say about those cars based on what they have as options. So yes, you've got to prepare. You know, I mean, there's a level of professionalism that kind of should be maintained. And to go into the junkyard and just start guessing would be a bunch of guesses, which is okay. But, you know, there's only one shot to do the show. So I do prepare and I create things I'm going to say about the car. And there's 7 of these notebooks right here for the 3 seasons, and they're all packed with handwritten stuff. So I keep them. And sometimes just off camera, there might be little cue cards that I don't guess, and I get it right without having to screw up and make a bunch of takes. So yes, preparation is part of any good TV production or anything really. Preparation is the bottom line. But you know, the thing is though, we get to these yards and I don't always know. Here's the thing: we have a theme. Each show, there's a theme. The cars fit a theme, either, you know, cops and robbers, but I don't know what that theme is going to be until we get to the show, and the cars then create the theme. Like we went to one yard in Idaho, and there was a 5-liter police car, a 74 LTD police car, a Torino, excuse me, a Q code 351 Cobra Jet police car, 2-door, very strange car. And then that led to cops and robbers, police cars versus hot rods. So we found 5 vehicles, 2 cop cars, 3 hot rods, and that led to the theme, cops and robbers. But when I get to the yard, again, I start making notes, but I don't know what the theme's going to be till I get there. The cars then tell me what it's going to be. If that makes any sense.
No, that does, understandably. Good. Bob.
How do you figure out which junkyards to go to? Do you get leads from someone? Guys telling you, "Hey, I've been to this junkyard, and you got to see this."
Or do they show up and say, "Hey, come on out to my junkyard because I got this, that, or something else"?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of everything, really. In some cases, you know, rabid viewers will say to us, "Hey, this yard in Wisconsin is awesome. There's a couple of yards. There's a place called Zeb's in Wisconsin. We haven't been there yet. We're going to go." And we get words from people about yards that are, you know, amazing. A place in White, Georgia, Old Car City, USA, an amazing place. Went there, shot 3 episodes there, and mostly it's word of mouth, and sometimes Hemmings Motor News. You'll see a junkyard in Hemmings that has a bunch of Edsels or something like that, and we hit them up. In fact, there's a place in Elizabeth, Colorado called Rambler Ranch. We went there. This fellow named Terry Gale, a well-off fellow who has in the middle of the Colorado woods a bunch of beautiful steel buildings. In them are restored Ramblers. Well, the show's not it's not museum gold, but in the back of the place, he's got just all kinds of AMCs out in the woods. So we did a couple episodes there at Rambler Ranch, and I read about that place in Hemmings Classic Car. So we get the ideas to go in many ways, but if the yard is good, the only thing that's kind of a nightmare is a couple times, you know, we've asked the fellow who owns the yard, "You got old cars?" "Oh yeah, I got a bunch of them." He has 12 old cars and 900 late model pickup trucks. You're like, "Oh no!" So we try to avoid that. I mean, the show, it could be compelling, and you know, in the 4th season, I will include, we're going to do trucks and maybe some late model stuff, you know, maybe some 80s and 90s, you know, maybe some of that. And some import stuff for sure, some Porsches, some Saabs, things like that. We did a sports car episode, in fact, in Texas. And that was a function of getting to the yard and realizing that this guy had a lot of old cars, but a lot of new stuff too. But we did find a bunch of interesting sports cars, a Jensen Healey, a Porsche 914, some, you know, MGA stuff. So we did a sports car episode. I think that's on right now on Motor Trend. So we don't know what's going to happen until we get there, but we qualify the yard beforehand to make sure they really, really, really have enough old cars, and we don't get stuck like in a late model pickup part, you know, which could be, I think, boring to the viewer potentially because it's all new stuff. I may be wrong, but at this point we focus on older cars.
Have you thought about what is it is there a car or a type of yard you want to go to that you haven't found yet?
Wow. Well, you know, we were in a Studebaker junkyard in Texas, and that was a great place. I mean, because that guy had everything from a Lowy Coupe, a 53, of course the Starliner's the 50, the Studebaker's going backwards, that whole thing, and the Wagon Air, and he didn't have no Avantis, but otherwise almost everything from Studebaker's greatest hits was there, and so that was cool. We went to a place with a bunch of Mustangs, went to an all Mopar yard, so we've kind of hit a lot of stuff. There was an all Buick yard, hit that one up. So it'd been a little bit of anything. I would like to go to a yard with a lot of vintage Volkswagens. I think that a Beetle episode would be good, but finding a yard with a bunch of like some 49s, some 51s, you know, that kind of some Edmullers, you know, Carmen Gears, you know, and again, junkyards are one thing, and personal hoards, that's another thing too. So as we go into these things, by season 10, if there is such a thing, we might have, you know, squeezed the sponge to the point where we're
Dream
open
big,
to hoards.
Steve.
And, yes.
Dream big.
Yeah, I hope so. We'll see. But so yeah, we're open to anything. If it's an old car that's interesting, has a story, we're on it. A Stutz Bearcat junkyard. Now that's something I don't think we'll ever find.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, you know, way you go through and you come up with all this information, and granted, you do it because you research it, but this will probably air after this whole thing is done for him. But you notice Chris Jacobs is hosting SpaceX.
Six.
Yeah.
How cool
Now,
is that?
It is. It's an honor to work with that guy. I mean, he's a jack of all trades. In fact, he's been in movies with Christopher Walken and Johnny Depp and stuff like that. He's got a long history, and I think he's a Clark Gable vibe. I think the older he gets, the more work he'll get. He's kind of got that look to him. You know what I mean? I think drama and stuff will be his thing. But yeah, I was watching. It was a bummer. They didn't launch yesterday, and for good reason. I guess there was a storm coming. But he also did Skyscraper Live. Remember that a few years ago? There was a fellow who walked between two skyscrapers, and then also I think Egypt Pyramid Live. They opened up a tomb last I think it was January. I think it was. They were somewhere in Egypt. So he gets around, but it's cool. He's kind of the go-to guy for these live events to call the shots as things are happening. So
Clark Gable, have you ever told him he looks like Clark Gable?
You know, I did. I said, Cary Grant, Clark Gable. He says, well, I get that. He's got the chin and stuff like that. You know, he's a good-looking dude, whatever. That's what Hollywood eats up. They love that kind of stuff. So,
he's a modest guy, and that's the important thing. I like that about Chris. But, you know, it's interesting. He tosses to Rick DeBrule all the time on your show, Barrett Jackson. Now, Rick is, and again, this is probably for a very small portion of our audience, but he's a Cal Poly San Luis Obispo guy. Grew up in San Luis Obispo. So Rick is from Cal Poly. Dave Curley, who is working with Chris on this SpaceX thing, he's actually a Cal Poly guy. And I'm a Cal Poly guy, and Chris has been on the show. So the thing is, the only way you get Chris Jacobs is show your diploma, and then Chris will answer your phone calls. So I'm going to
Now, he does show up for our car club meetings every once in a while.
There's got to be a Cal Poly guy in there, I think, somewhere.
We gave
Cal Poly, though.
We gave him an honorary membership.
Oh, well, okay. Then you
But, you know, I saw him on the SpaceX thing yesterday, and I didn't recognize him at first. It's the first time I've seen him without a hat on.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, you haven't seen his show? Other show with Lisa Joyner?
No, because all I see, well, I did once, but most of the time he's got a hat on.
Right.
So seeing him without a hat is very unusual.
That's right. That's right. He was doing a show called Long Lost Family with Lisa Joyner, and they did, I think, 3 or 4 seasons. It wasn't picked up again. He mentioned that. I guess after 3 or 4. No, unfortunately, I thought it was a great show. It brought me to tears. I'd weep a little bit. I don't cry that much, but it was a great show, you know. And Chris himself is adopted. He'll tell you that. And so we kind of rang a chord with him. Yeah, raised by a great family, I'm sure. But it rang a bell with him, and good on him for putting his for being in that show.
Yeah. Right. I worked with Lisa at Fox 11 many moons ago, but we don't need to talk. It's not all about me. It's about this guy. But I will say this, back to Chris and SpaceX, is I just had this crazy dream one night that Chris was introducing SpaceX, and they were talking about the rocket. And then you showed up and you looked at the VIN number on SpaceX, and you immediately started talking about, well, this came with a rocket thruster of a certain variety.
That's right. Yeah, left-hand thread fasteners on the titanium bolts that hold it together. Funny thing is, I went to a place called Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Graduated in 1986, but what's his name there? Jonas Clark. father of modern rocketry. Gosh, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. This fellow was a Rocketeer expert. What was his name? Gosh. Anyway, 1920s. Yeah, he was a big Rocketeer fellow, and he was a Clark professor. And in fact, Werner von Braun and the Germans read this fellow's documentations and dissertations on rocketry from the States in Spencer, Massachusetts, and then of course put those rockets to use during World War II, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And of course going to the moon, but rocketry, Clark University, father of rocketry, modern rocketry.
Father of Robert Goddard.
Robert Goddard. Bingo.
Yeah.
Goddard.
Right.
There you go. Robert Goddard. Yeah. In fact, there's a time capsule at Clark that's supposed to be open, I think, in 2030 or something like that. And it's a sealed tube in the ground. And in there are some things that he put in there along with other folks. So anyway, time capsules, Clark University. But yeah, neat thing though, SpaceX, the whole idea of a private company, Elon Musk, taking the next step and picking up where NASA left off and potentially, commercializing spaceflight. What a cool thing. It's only 60 million, I think, per seat on that thing or something like that. I won't be riding, but.
So when you get to your 30th anniversary, 30th season of the show, you're going to be on Mercury or something, and it's going to be like, well, we found this space junk, and let's take a look at the VIN number. I think it'll work. Let's pitch it now. Well, maybe not Mercury. Mercury's a little warm, I think. But, I think it's a possibility.
On that theme, actually, we sometimes, we have brainstorms. I did pitch a potential episode at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Pima, Arizona, where they have a junkyard for airplanes. And I know that because, the SALT treaty, Strategic Arms Limitation, every so often a B-52 has to be chopped, and there's a Russian satellite that flies over to make sure that's happening. So we may do an episode there and just walk through that junkyard and explore the Phantoms, the various jet aircraft that were built during Korea and from thereafter. And so we might do an airplane junkyard episode, which would make some sense. I think that's Junkyard Gold.
Yeah.
I think that'd be cool, especially if he does the thing where, what I do to fix this up? And then, of course, they have the animation come up.
Right.
And took a little turtle wax and clean off the numbers on the side. Yeah. Hey, we have a junkyard like that, too, up in Southern California outside Edwards Air Force Base.
Yes.
Where they've got a lot of planes of that nature, too. We're just waiting for them to take them out of mothballs one day and say, okay, they're flying them again.
Yeah. Are they jetliners? It's jetliners too, right?
It's everything.
I think they have parking areas for that. Sure.
Yeah, commercial as well as military.
That's cool. Yeah, hot rodding takes many forms, not just on four tires.
Oh yeah.
I mean, supersonic flights, submarines. I mean, any number of things that we use to get around. Hot rodding is everywhere. It's cool.
Well, and how many racers have taken a jet plane to make into a car, or the technology.
For better or worse in some cases.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
So what was it back when, and Bob mentioned this a little bit before, but when you were just getting to the point of really digging into this vast treasure trove of information that you've been looking at, what got you into that? Was it basically you starting to read the manuals to be able to recognize what all these VIN numbers are on these cars?
Well, the Barrett Jackson, I started doing that back in 2005, and it's been 15 years. And the first show I did was Florida. And at that point in time, I watched the show the year before that. Alan DeCadenet was on the block. And what I kind of noticed was that they were doing okay work, but like a Boss 429 Mustang would come up, and Alan, I love the guy, but he was a British fella, doesn't really know the cars well, didn't grow up with them. So he'd open the hood, well, that's quite a lump, he'd say, looking at a Boss 429. It's not a lump. And I'd say, is that the T or the S? I see magnesium valve covers, Alan, that would be the better engine, the solid cam, but he didn't go there. So I turned the knob up to 10 instead of 9, put it that way. So when I got there for that Florida show in 05, I just brought an extra level of technicality to the show. Although I will say that Craig, sometimes I go a little far. Here's what happens. Like I'll put my flashlight on the rear axle of a Roadrunner, and there's a Dana 60, but it's kind of got a rusty cover on it. And Craig says, hey, Steve, don't put your flashlight up the car's rear end on camera. So if it's not a pretty sight, he says, don't do that. So I kind of have to sort of check myself to make sure that I'm not about to, show rusty springs or something. Because, the image and aura of Barrett Jackson, the cars are pristine, and they mostly are. But sometimes they're just cars. But that said, I kind of have to check myself to make sure I'm not about to put the camera on something that's not pretty to look at. I get that.
Good point. Yeah, I understand that.
Randy and I came across a vehicle. We were at Barrett Jackson 2 years ago at Scottsdale, and we came across a gentleman who had a car that he thought was worth X amount of dollars.
Right.
And when
Yeah.
it went across the block, it went it tanked. What do you do when you're looking at a car and you know what basically the reserve is, or if someone's got a reserve or a goal, but you know so much about you know enough about the car to say, yeah, this isn't quite right. How do you hold yourself back?
Well, my job on the auction block on TV is to accentuate the positive. That's what I do. I'm not there to rain on the parade. And every car on this planet, you can find something to not like about it, potentially. It's no fun. So I just, it gives some history about the car. But with that said, about 98% of the cars at Barrett Jackson are no reserve cars, which means, that if the room isn't strong and if the bidders aren't there, and they usually are. One thing that Barrett Jackson does a great job of is having 2 bidders per car, at least. That's the ratio they maintain. So, but if the car is not bidding for strong money and it sells for $8,000 on a $20,000 hope, it sells for $8,000. Again, it's a no reserve auction. So that's the thing you have to remember. But the other side of that coin is the psychology of a no reserve auction is that the people in the auction room say to themselves, that car is going to sell. It's not going to be a no sale. And the guy, put it this way, if you're there bidding on cars, you might get the idea that the average guy wants too much for his car. The reserve's insane. Why bother bidding? Well, in a no reserve auction, that car is going to sell. So everybody bids. And more often than not, the selling price, the hammer price is it makes people happy. I'll leave it like that. But there are cases, sure, where people, they get less than they hope they will. And a lot of cases where people get a lot more than they think they will. And generally the market speaks. The folks who spend big money on those vehicles generally know something, like if the Corvette, if it's a 427 tri-power car that was born a small block and it's generally understood, it's going to sell for what it's worth. That's kind of the way that works. More often than not, I have high respect for the bidders at Barrett Jackson. For the most part, when we're talking about the heavy duty cars, they do their homework and the car sells for about what it's worth. The one thing I don't understand, well, I do understand, but it's about plenty of surplus cash, is when a Blazer sells for $80,000 an LS1 and it just looks right and the guy just wants it and $80,000. That happens a lot at auctions. And it just shows that the economy is strong and people are buying what they want because they can. So that happens too a lot of times at no reserve auctions.
Speaking of Barrett Jackson, in the pandemic, everything is on hold. Have you heard anything from them as far as and they're doing a lot of stuff online, which is good, but as far as getting back to the actual events, have you heard anything as far as when they might be ready to start doing this again?
Well, the thing you have to remember is that, Barrett Jackson, the desires to run the show is one thing, but the ability to do that at the venue, which they don't own, is a whole other thing. And Mohegan Sun, which is the Connecticut-based casino, where they're going to have the next auction in June, well, they're not open for business yet. So as a result, Barrett Jackson, I think, took the bull by the horns and canceled that show. And I don't think they're even open for business, Mohegan Sun. So the bottom line, I think the word is that the next show, the next auction, will be October, Las Vegas. That's the assumption. But everything between here and there has been postponed and canceled. Because again, if Barrett Jackson owned the venue, and even then, if they did, they'd have to satisfy state regulations. So, they'd love to start doing these things right away. But I know that it won't be till October, till there's another auction for sure.
What's a car that you haven't seen yet across the block that you'd like to see just to find out where the market is?
That's a good question. Well, I think I'll answer that in another way. My favorite thing on this planet are factory-built superstocks, and more specifically, factory AFX cars, the altered wheelbase Plymouth and Dodge fleet from 1965. And we have seen some of those cars cross the block at Barrett Jackson. In particular, there was a car called the Kentucky Colonel, which was a 65 Coronet Dodge that sold at Scottsdale this past 2020, and it didn't go for much, like $53,000, which, and to me, that was kind of a crestfalling moment, because to me, it's $1 million car. It's the most important car in the world. Not really, but it was a very well preserved A990 that had been turned into a funny car in 1966, and only $53,000. You know what I mean? So it had to have been worth more, I'm thinking, but somebody bought that right. But to me, I think, if I could get the string of 65 AFX cars to cross the block and have them advertised properly, it'd be cool to see what they're really worth. But we've seen, I think, a couple of those cars, and some clones and some max wedges and things. But yeah, I think factory race cars, when those things cross the block, I always perk my ears up. And more often than not, in a I don't know, sort of an enthusiast setting, not a collector setting, those cars don't bring what they should. I find that's kind of a disappointing thing. But that's just me. You know, you buy the car, buy it for small, bring it to the next place, and sell it for what it's worth, and that's good on you if you bought it and can do that.
And you own one, right? And you've even driven it on the street.
Yeah, well, my cars, I like altered wheelbase cars, and I've created 3 of them. One was a Chevy Nova called the Wilshire Shaker. The other was a '63 Dodge called the Rampage. And those cars, I've built them and then sold them. And I have one now that I still have. It's a 1981 Ford Fairmont. I call it the Funny Fairmont, and I drive it around pretty much everywhere. If you just Google Funny Fairmont, and you'll see a picture of the thing. It's an '81 2-door post with 4.6 4-valve 4-cam with Australian 8-stack injection, 5-speed. It kind of looks the part of an old-time funny car. But I love building models of them, and wink, wink, there's something kind of cool. This right here just hit the marketplace. This is the first ever altered wheelbase model, and this basically is by Mobius. This is the Golden Commandos. This is coming up. Okay, can you see it already?
Yeah, no, 65
okay,
Belvedere, it looks like.
Yeah, correct, yeah, and this is actually the first model ever done of an altered wheelbase car. Everything previous was sort of toy-like from AMT and MPC in the 60s. This is a very well-researched, well-done model, and the box is this right here. But for the first time ever, Mobius, these guys right here, Mobius, they came out with these things, and yeah, the model kit of the first altered wheelbase car. This is the Golden Commandos cars, which still exists. But I like to build myself. I take a model like this one here, and I'll slice it and dice it and turn it into this.
Yeah, there you
and
go.
I alter the wheelbase, and the thing of it is, you know, I move the wheelbase forward and stuff, and I build them so they're sort of launching like that. And I put weight in the back right there. You can see there's a wheel weights from you know, weighting. I glue them in so the car sits, and it actually does a wheel stand. It kind of balances like that.
Oh, how great is that?
Hand, so, or it sits flat, but so I don't own any factory funny cars. Those things, like I say, are quite expensive, and people can't really drive them because they're all out race cars. But you can alter the wheelbase on anything and make it cool, you know. So yeah.
Wait till Dale sees that.
Yeah.
You'll get a call.
Yeah, Dale and I, Dale Snoke, we're good buddies. In fact, he did a lot of the welding on my Fairmonts and also on the Rampage Dart. And it's funny because I did a book some years back, How to Build Altered Wheelbase Cars.
Okay.
And in this is Dale welding on some of my stuff. And
funny.
like that, there's Dale. There's Dale right there, welding. Yeah, there's our buddy. Anyway, so yeah. Dale's a good guy. Good
yes,
dude.
he is.
That's very good. No, that's great that you're putting that together. Hey, I'm going to go back to the pandemic thing again. When you found out, how did that affect you? How did it affect the show? What happened when you found out that everything was getting shut down?
Well, I'll tell you, it was kind of weird. We were at Stevens Performance in Anderson, Alabama, doing an all Mopar episode. And the word on the set, in particular, the fellow named Doug, he's their camera guy, he kept looking at his phone. Guys, this is getting real. 210 people in China. And then next, 500 people. He says, boy, this is kind of weird. And we thought, well, it's over in China. I mean, it's sad, but, you know, it won't be here. But on set during that episode, we first got our senses that there's something going on here. And then we all flew home. And then within a week, the word came out that, hey, this thing's going to be everywhere mathematically. And sure enough, mathematically, it has been everywhere. It's still doing its thing. So it was on set. But every day, he'd say, Doug, our cameraman, he would say, boy, 210 and 215 cases, that whole thing, but nothing in the States yet. But that was the first of it, you know.
Like, I have to say, what have you been doing to pass the time, just out of curiosity?
Well, you know, building model cars, and I have an Instagram page where I sort of will, in about 8 steps, take a model kit from standard to altered. And one thing, I don't paint them, and here's one I just did recently. You know, another one. This is a '66 Mercury. And I altered the wheelbase, and it's kind of crunchy. But again, I call these funny car folk art. And a lot of guys, you're going to paint it? you never paint a car after you build it. But with that said, I sit in front of the TV, watching Motor Trend or Ancient Aliens. I love watching that on History Channel. It's a cool show. I'll sit there watching that stuff and just blast these things out, kind of like in a fever. And I don't worry about paint and detail, but I've been building on models and some writing too.
Mhm.
Although car magazines, as you know, 19 of the 22 run by Peterson were canceled. So
Yeah.
I'm not writing as much as I used to. But yeah,
Well, how
Hot Rod
weird
Motor
is
Trend.
that? Yeah, talk about that. I mean,
Yeah, well, that happened on December 6th, as they say, a day that will live in infamy. And what I heard was in L.A. at Douglas Boulevard, Source Interlink Media, which of course is 10/Motor Trend, on a Friday afternoon after lunch, everybody's gathered together. Hey, folks, meeting mandatory, come on in. And everybody was told on that day, it was December 5th, a Friday, the magazines are done. And it wasn't even like a wind down. They said, stop. It's over. And so magazines were at the printing press and everything back to magazines that were being, planned out, all of that unplugged. So there was no farewell issue for a lot of these magazines, like, Mopar Muscle Car Review, Chevy High Performance, Rod and Custom, all of them just unplugged like a light bulb. And 105 people, were sent packing. And it was something that everybody knew was coming, because when the merger with Discovery Channel happened between Motor Trend and Discovery, Discovery folks made it clear, hey, we're interested in your digital element, Roadkill, that whole thing, but the paper stuff, we do not want to be involved with, because they didn't see it as a growth industry. And I guess they were right, So sadly, 19 magazines sent by the wayside. What that leaves, I think, is a vacuum. Now, Hemmings has a strong couple of books, of course. Hemmings Muscle Machines, Hemmings Classic Car. I subscribe to both. Terry McGee and Jeff Koch were both my co-workers at Hot Rod way back when, and they're running those magazines, or they're at them. So there's life, I think, and it could well be that we'll see some tentative steps maybe to relaunch things like Carcraft. Let's hope, but I was shocked by it. In fact, I had a couple of stories. This right here, this is my office where I work. I was writing some stories for those magazines. I got a phone call. Bob Melhoff, editor of Mopar Muscle, said, "Hey, Steve, stop, don't bother, don't finish." What? Well, we're done. So it was a shock to everybody, but really not a shock at the same time. So,
it was kind of strange, because you had some of the publications that were doing quite well. Street Rodder was the top magazine in its segment. It's gone. And that was just kind of, really? You got the number one magazine and you're shutting it down.
Yeah. Well, I think what it came down to is, I understand that something like 60% of the revenue of those 22 magazines came from 3 of them: Motor Trend, Hot Rod, and Four Wheeler. That means 40% of the revenue came from 19. So if you ask me, it wasn't a big number, but they threw a lot of baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? Yeah. But at the same time, I think the idea was to minimize, the paper element, which was part of the deal when Discovery came along, and everybody knew that it was coming. So, it's supposedly the way things are. I remember when I started Hot Rod magazine back in 1998. In fact, I was at Hot Rod from August 19th, 97 through January 20th, 2004. I got on my wall here. I did 77 episodes, or 77 issues of Hot Rod. I was a part of as tech editor. But even then, we were talking about this. When I first got to Hot Rod, we didn't have the internet. But by 2001, 2, 3, 4, the word was, this is changing. The world's, we had hotrod.com. And the big problem back then was, how could you monetize? How could you charge people for visiting hotrod.com? What we did instead was the stories we wrote for the magazine, we had extra content online, which people could then go see. And I think the problem still remains, how do you monetize magazines online? How do you get people to pay for that? It's a problem. But, it's certainly, it's a train. It's coming through town and it's not stopping,
Yeah, I've got to say this, at least, as you could tell, Bob and I still are afflicted with a condition called pandemic hair. In California, at least, well, now where Bob lives, you can actually get your hair cut, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in my neck of the woods, closer to Los Angeles, they're not allowing haircut places to open yet, and I'm not to the point where I'm ready to jump into my hairstylist's house or apartment or something like that. But you, are barbers working at your place, or did you do it yourself?
I gotta say, you guys you're looking fine. Your hair looks fine. Mine, this is, I did this myself. About 5 weeks ago, my hair was getting long. I said, I have a clipper, which I use on my cat, believe it or not. Anyway, so I put the guard on. I tried to do the short on the sides, long on the top. It was going wrong. I took the guard off to zap my head, just went bald. So it's 4 weeks of growth right here. And this is, And in Massachusetts last week, they just allowed people to go to barbers and hairdressers with an appointment. But before last week, it was the same thing. You could not get a haircut anywhere. So I did the most logical thing, and I just chopped it off. And it was wonderful at first, you know.
At first.
Now you get stuck to your pillow at night because you're sticky.
That's right. Yeah, everybody thinks I'm in the Marines or something like that, or, you know.
Yeah,
It's growing out. It's growing out.
Well, you know, you got to do something while you're in quarantine or something. So just to reiterate, you cut your hair with clippers intended for your cat.
Well, the thing of it is, I mean, one thing all around here, maybe clippers were like in zero supply. You couldn't find them anywhere. And they were from Petco, like $190. These brawn clippers could be used on anything you want, you know, but I had a cat that was kind of had mothballs. I cleaned it, put alcohol, you know, and I figured, you know, I hold the cat. I can use the same clippers. Cat's not.
Yeah.
This is a man who's not allergic to cats.
Yeah, there you go. Clippers and toilet paper, both in short supply. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. All right. So let's get an update on, it's been a while since we've talked back at Barrett Jackson a few years ago. Let's get the update. We do know one thing about you first off. Your first car, you and I have something, I believe, pretty much akin to the same thing. Your first car was a?
Well, it was a Renault Lacar or a 69 AMC Ambassador, depending on which, or a Hemi Charger. Those three, I guess you could right first. But I had my mom's Renault Lacar. That was one of the first. And then, of course, there was, well, technically the very first car that I ever had in my possession, a 69 AMC Ambassador four-door, former Civil Air Patrol car.
Actually, you haven't told me that.
Yeah, that was the first. And then I had a Hemi Charger, which was the first hot rod I ever bought. And that was going from a Lacar to a Hemi Charger was an interesting step.
Didn't you have a 64 Dodge somewhere in there?
Well, yes, certainly. It was within the first couple of years. Yeah, 64 Dodge.
Oh, there you go.
I put a Max Wedge in it. Sure, that was in there. Oh, it was in the mix. And yeah, I bought it. And the funny thing is, I used to work for a company called Munchkin Motors, an automotive toy store. And we traveled Hershey, Carlisle. We even came down to San Diego to Jack Murphy Stadium in like 1988, I think it was, with our trailer and all these wagons and toy cars. And at that place, I found a 64 Dodge Polar with a 383 dual quads, push button torque flight, 391, 8 3/4, $2,700, right? Which today, I mean, it was fair money back then for that car. So I bought it. We flat towed it back to Connecticut behind the Econoline Munchkin van, and then I built that into a Max Wedge clone after a while. But $2,700 for a 64 Polar, and it was a California car, which is the bottom line. Out here in Massachusetts, rusts, everything turns to rust within 5 years. It just turns to junk. But that car was solid. And I bought it in California, flat towed it across, and had it here about 87, 88 through about 1991, I think it was. And, turned
and what's in your garage now?
Well, I only have three. I've had as many as 12, 13, 14, but right now I have a 1998 GMC Sonoma with a 4.8 liter LS motor, V8 swap. It's peppy. It looks stock, single exhaust, but it'll lay rubber and pass anything I want, you know, within reason. And then I have a smart car, a 2009 smart car, those little 4.2 things, and they're neat little cars. It's kind of like I can say to somebody, it's like the modern version of the Nash Metropolitan or the Bantam, you know, in a way. And it's a well-engineered car. It's got rear-wheel drive and kind of cool. It's like driving a go-kart. And then, of course, I have the 81 Ford Fairmont altered wheelbase car with the camera motor. So those are the three I have right now. Yeah, and it's fine. You can only drive one at a time. I finally figured that out.
I see. And the one you're missing that you wish you could get back someday?
Well, you know, the cars that I sold, I pretty much sold them for a very solid reason, and either to pay for the next one. I don't really have seller's remorse on anything. Oh, I guess I did sell my Rampage Dodge Dart. We went for $19,500 at the auction. It would have been nice to see something like $25,000 or $34,000 for it. So if I could have that back, I would. But it's okay. The fellow who has it drives it all over the place. He loves it, and you know, it's okay. That was the Rampage altered wheelbase Dart.
Go ahead, Bob.
Which is the best? If you were going to sell your car, is there one auction site that is better than another as far as drawing the buyers?
Well, you know, I got to say I've done a lot with eBay. I appreciate eBay, but I've done Craigslist like that. And you know, I guess you know, eBay can be a good thing. And of course, you know, Barrett Jackson's a good place. I mean, it's costs some money to get the car in, but if you want you know, probably the most eyeballs and the strongest bidders to look at your car, Barrett Jackson's not a bad thing to do either. I'll leave it like that. And of course, the private sale, that's always a good thing to do. Put your car on paper and hope for the best.
Well, along the lines of Barrett Jackson, is there a venue that is better or?
Yeah. Well, I will say this. Yeah, the Scottsdale show, that's the mothership. That's a 6-day event in every January. And that's the one. If you can afford to wait and hold your car and do it at that one, you'll have the most eyeballs at that one. The smaller shows, Mohegan Sun in Connecticut, Florida, Palm Beach, those are equally good shows, but you will see the caliber of cars at those shows won't be quite what you'll find at Scottsdale, because most folks, they keep their 10th cars for Scottsdale, and it may be, the fun cars come out for the smaller shows. And of course, Vegas it's a unique show too. Vegas, you'll find a lot of European, Lamborghinis and Ferraris, that sort of thing, and some muscle cars, but Scottsdale, yeah, that's the mothership. That's where most people do their really serious business, at Scottsdale.
Okay. Well, for those of you who follow us on social media and the like, we also have a Patreon account. We're also inviting you to join us as patrons. It only takes a little bit of funding to help us out, and just basically deal with some minor expenses for the show is what it amounts to. Put it online, put it on YouTube, because this will be on YouTube as well. So if you want to do that, we're also, as part of luring you to possibly invest in us a little more, Steve's going to talk to us about the top 5 cars that he has seen during his junkyard show that he may want to take home if he could. So we're going to talk about that coming up in our Patreon segment coming up here that you can watch exclusively on patreon.com. So that'll be coming up as well. So, I tell you what, Steve, this has been a great visit with you. And tell us a little bit, are your books still out there? Can people still buy the books you have that you wrote?
Sure. Yeah, I've done 5 books so far. The first one was How to Build Altered Wheelbase Cars. This one right here, and you can find this one most readily on eBay. Just type in altered wheelbase, and there it will be. Bear in mind, there are 2 versions of it. The first one is in color. The second one is a print on demand, which is in black and white. So if you're concerned with color, make sure you know which one you're buying, because the ones they do now are print on demand, black and whites. Beyond that, I did a show called Rusted Muscle, not a show, a book, and that was basically junk cars in the wild, and you can also find that online. And then the more important ones, I guess, are 3: 1001 Muscle Car Facts, 1001 Mustang Facts, and 1001 Corvette Facts. And those 3 books are readily found at Barnes & Noble, and of course online. And they're selling well, and it's a nice thing. They were each 9 months of efforts, 9 to 12 months, and it was a grinder. But I still have one more in me. I think I might do a Volkswagen Facts, Beetles and rabbits and stuff. That story hasn't been told yet. It's a worldwide interest, so that might happen soon. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Bob, you have any other questions?
No, you've been great, Steve. I appreciate all the information you've given us. And I look forward to watching you again, because I always learn something about the cars when you're on stage. You pick it out. Yeah, you've got your notes, but the point is you learned it. You went back to find it out. Yeah.
I'll say in a couple of seconds, our duty as sportscasters or telecasters is to give a car a voice. Don't guess, be accurate, and tell something the car would like to tell you about itself that it can't. 3-speed manual on GTO, or a tri-power in a full-size Catalina. Just point out the weird stuff, and it takes an eye to find that stuff. Any one of us could do it, but you have that third eye for hot rod stuff or interesting stuff, and that's where we give the car a voice. It's as simple as that.
Steve Magnante, ladies and gentlemen, he joins us again from the Steve Magnante Mansion in beautiful Massachusetts. There you go. Thanks for joining us on this one. We look forward to seeing you when production gets going again. And in the meantime, you still have a lot of other shows that are still running on the Motor Trend app. You want to check that out as well as some of the other Barrett Jackson when it comes back. So look forward to that. Hey, don't forget, everybody, to listen to our audio podcast on radio.com, knx1070.com. Click the menu on demand and talking about cars on the KNX site. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, plus, of course, our newly formed production company of Two Tired Guys Productions. Also, don't forget to subscribe and become a Two Tired Guys Productions patron by going to patreon.com and get all sorts of swag and stuff Until next time, I'm Randy Kerdoon for Hot Rod Bob. That's him right there. Ooh, nice logo, Bob.
Get out of the way here.
Just duck down. That's what I always tell him to do. Until next time, I'm Randy Kerdoon with Steve Magnante as we have some fun talking about cars. We'll see you next time, everybody.